Hello all, welcome to channel Tech Tutorials Learn by Doing. In this channel, we post tutorial videos on tools and technologies that are being used in IT industry. This tutorial series covers tutorial on Amazon Web Services, also known as AWS. So let's get started for the day.
In this video, we'll create one project. We can see the architecture diagram of project in the screen. The green line here indicates the flow whenever there is successful processing of the transaction. The red line indicates the flow whenever there is an error in processing transaction. And blue line indicates the flow whenever there is success or failure in processing of transaction. In this architecture, user uploads the transaction file in S3. Then S3 will automatically trigger the Lambda, which will summarize the transactions. And this summarized transaction will be stored in RDS or relational database. And in case of error or in case of success, the log of those transactions will be stored in DynamoDB, and the notification email will be sent to client through SNS service. And in case of failure, those failed record will be stored in S3 bucket so that we can reprocess it again, and it will notify to the client as well as store those record in DynamoDB so that we can source it later. Now let's head ahead to the console for creating this architecture and implement our Lambda code. Let me create a relational database first, as it requires a longer time to create. For creating relational database, I'll go to services and type RDS. It's the resource where we store our summarized transactions. If you will look at the architecture, then it is the this resource. And after clicking on RDS, click on create database. We will be creating MySQL database for our project. MySQL database, free tier. Then let me click on auto generate password and copy this username so that I can use it later for connecting to database to insert our summarized transaction. And click on auto generate password so that password will be generated automatically after the databases has been initialized. Then let me enable all setting as default. I require public access so that I can create table from using this client tool from my local. Let all the authentication and all the parameter be as default. And on additional configuration, I don't want backups for this. I don't want to enable maintenance. Let me once review all the setting. Port is 3306. Okay, seems like all the settings are specified. Now let me click on create database. It will take a while before creating a database. Till then, we can create another resource for our project. Let me create these S3 buckets. One is the process bucket and another is error bucket. For that, let me duplicate this tab. Database is in creation phase. Till then, we can create the S3 buckets. For creating S3 buckets, go to services and type S3 and click on create bucket. Bucket name will be tutorial. Cell summarize. This is name of our project. Error bucket. Bucket name has to be unique and it should not contain spaces or any uppercase letters. All the setting be as default and let me click on create bucket. This is the first bucket and we require another bucket also. This is for error bucket and we require another bucket to reprocess the transaction which will trigger the Lambda process bucket. If you see at the architecture, RDS is in creation phase. Buckets have been already created. We require to create SNS DynamoDB. So for creating SNS, go to services and click on SNS. Simple notification service. We'll create a topic. Topic name as tech tutorial. Sales summarize. SNS. Let me copy this name and paste here the display name also and click on create topic. The topic has been created. Now let us create the subscription. This is the endpoint where the mail has to be sent. So for protocol, I'll click on email and on endpoint, I'll give my email ID. Let me copy this email ID and paste here. Create subscription. We have to confirm the subscription before we can receive the message. So I'll get a mail in a while from, yeah, I have get the mail to confirm the subscription and let me click on confirm subscription so that I can receive the mail. Subscription has been confirmed. So we have created these resources, these resources, these resources, and it is in phase of creation. Now let us create a DynamoDB table. For that, go to services and type DynamoDB. Click on create table, give table name, take tutorial, sales summarize, Dynamo table. And partition key, it is like the primary key of RDS. We require partition key to send every time to the this DynamoDB table, but other parameters they will be optional. So there will not be any schema, but we should always send this partition key. And if there are multiple partition key, meaning that if there are multiple key that make up the primary key, then we should specify it here as short key and partition key. If you go to the code, then we can see that there are two fields that will be always be sent. Let me go to the Lambda function. One field is start time. Let me copy it. Start time. Another field is file name. Let me go to the Python again and copy file name. Should always send this record, but these other fields can be anything. Short key will be file name. Both will be as a string data type. If it is of any other data type, then we can select here accordingly. Then with all settings as default, let me create a table for DynamoDB. Table is also being created. Now we have created relational database resource, S3 resource, and SNS resource, and DynamoDB table resource. We have to create the Lambda function. But before creating Lambda function, we have to create the IAM role that allows the Lambda to publish the message to SNS, to write the log to RDS as well as to DynamoDB, and to write the log to S3. So let us create the IAM role first. Let me duplicate, and on services, click on IAM. Click on roles, click on create role. We require this role for AWS service, and that is for Lambda function. Lambda function uses this role. What are the permissions that the Lambda function require? First is basic Lambda execution permission. Let me search for it. Basic Lambda execution role. Then it should be able to read data from S3 as well as write data from S3. For now, let us give S3 full access. S3 full access. Then it should be able to send notification to SNS. For now, let us keep SNS full access. SNS full access. And it should be also able to send database to RDS and DynamoDB. So let us search for RDS. RDS full access and DynamoDB full access. DynamoDB full access. If you are to use in actual production scenario, then we should keep only selected permission. That is to send the file to S3 and read the file from S3. It should write to the RDS table. It should write to the DynamoDB table, but it do not require fetching of record from this one. So in production scenario, we should always give the desired permission only. But for this project, I'll giving all the full access. Let us give name as tutorial sales summarize Lambda role. And your permission here S3, SNS, RDS, DynamoDB, and basic Lambda execution role. Now let me create the role. It is saying that I do not have permission to create the role, but I have already created one existing role, so that I'll use that role in Lambda function, and it has all these privileges. But in your use case, you can create this role here and use later on Lambda. Now let us create the Lambda function. For that, go to services and click on Lambda. And click on create function. Function name store data summarize. Code are in Python 7, Python 3.9. So Python 3.9, and on execution role permission, use an existing role, and from here you can choose the rule that you had created earlier and click on create function. The function has been created. Now let us paste our code from Python to this Lambda. To create a new project in Python, go to File and click on New Project. Let us keep the name of project as Cell Data Summarize. Cell Data Summarize. You are using virtual environment and Python as Python 3.8. If you have older version or newer version of Python, then you are free to use it. Now let us create the project in this window. Project is being created. I have already written the code, so I'll paste the code here and explain it's working. Let me delete this main file first, and let me create all the files that I had created for the architecture. First file is AWS Utility. Then I had created another file, constants. Then I had created another file, Lambda function. And finally, I had created another file as transaction processor. Constants file contain all the constants value that we'll use in the project. Let me paste this file here. Since you are using database, the name of the table database will be here, and the columns of relational database are as this one. And whenever there is any processing error, then the mail will be sent to the client with subject as error summarizing file, and whenever the transaction is processed successfully, then mail will be sent with the subject file summarization successfully. Now let us paste the code for AWS Utility. It contains all the utility function that will be useful while navigating to the AWS resources. Let me paste those content here and explain each file here to you. First module is delete S3 file. It will receive the bucket name and name of the file, and whenever it receives those file, it will create a POD3 resource, and with these resources it will delete the file. And I have created another function, get file from S3. Whenever this function is invoked by bucket name and file name, and optional parameter with delete is called to false, it will get the data from this file from this bucket and return to the client. And if we give the parameter with delete equals to false, then original file will be deleted, else it will be retained. Then I have created another function, upload to S3. If you call this function by passing the file content, bucket name and file name, it will create the resources, and with object handler with given bucket name and file name, and it will upload this content to the this bucket with this file name. And I have created another function, send SNS message, and whenever this function is called with this subject and this message, it will publish the function, or it will publish this message to this SNS, and based on the subscription it will send mail to the client. I have also created another function, upload to DynamoDB, and when you call this function by passing DynamoDB table name and data, it will push this data to this table. I have created the resources, and I have created the table reference, and with this table reference I am putting this data, and in case of any error the exception will be raised. Seems like this module is not installed, so let me click on install this Boto 3. Now let me paste the code for Lambda function also. And let me paste the code for transaction processor also. Let me explain the flow. Whenever Lambda is invoked, it will be invoked with the S3 content, the bucket of S3 content, and this function will be called. So it will iterate through all the content, S3 content. If you have multiple files, then there will be multiple event records. And if you have single file, there will be single event record. So we are iterating to the all event records. And if this record is from S3, then we'll process this transaction. But if this record is not from S3, then it will print trigger is not from S3, and it will return to the main calling function, and the program will be terminate. And if it's from S3, then it will track the start time, and it will get bucket name from this event record. And it will also get the file name based on the trigger. Then it will extract the file name and file data with the help of get s3 file function that we had created in this module. And whenever it faces any error while getting the file, it will log those data into DynamoDB table, and it will send the message. You can see the code here. It will create the in time with the current time. It will print the log, and it will send the mail to the client, and it will insert those failed record to the DynamoDB table with error as reading error reading S3 content from the reprocess bucket. And it will finally upload the content to the DynamoDB table. And if it successfully fetches the file, then it will summarize the transaction based on this function. We'll look into this function in a later. Then after this transaction has been summarized, it will insert those summarized transaction into RDS table. And if there is any error while summarizing transaction or inserting the data into RDS, then it will upload this content to the error bucket, and it will send message to the client, and it will insert those log data into DynamoDB table. And if it is successfully summarized and successfully inserted into RDS, then it will insert the log data as success to DynamoDB table, and it will also send the success message to the client. Now let us head to the transaction processor, this function that will summarize the transaction. Whenever this function is called, it will initialize the empty record first and record count as 0. And for all the line files, it will split those files, and it will get product name, quantity, amount, revenue. Our file will be like this. First field will be product name, second field will be quantity, third field will be amount, and fourth field will be revenue. We'll look into the sample file in a while. And for all this record, if it already exists in this dictionary, then it will add the current value to the existing value. And if it does not exist, then it will initialize with this value. And while iterating the whole content, it will get the summarized data. And summarized data will be stored as this product name, this value, and the file name. And finally, this generate SQL function will take this transaction list and generate the SQL query. And based on this SQL query, we'll insert this data into RDS. Now let us head to the console and implement this function. This PyMySQL is also not installed, so let me install this package also. It is external package, so it will be required to implement using Lambda layer. We'll see in the console. First is AWS Utility. Let us copy all the codes. AWS underscore utility and paste here. Right click, new file, AWS underscore utility dot py. It's this code here. Then the second function is constants. Let me copy all this and go here, create new file with name constants.py and paste its content here. Let me create another function also. Lambda function is already there. Let me paste the content of transaction processor. Create a new file. Transaction processor.py. Paste it content here. And on Lambda function, let me paste the content of Lambda function. Our Lambda function has been created and coded. Now let us deploy this Lambda function. But if you see in the code, we are getting this file from environment variable. So we will use environment variable of Lambda to obtain this value. For now, let us deploy our code. If you see here, then we also have additional module called PyMySQL that is not native to Python. So you have to install it manually using Lambda layer. For that, I'll go to the location where I had created my project in D drive, cell data summarize, partial environment, library, side packages. There were two packages, PyMySQL and PyMySQL dist.info. We have to use these packages to create. Let me create a new folder. These two files will be used to create Lambda layer. Let me zip this file, add to archive. Okay, now we can create the Lambda layer. Go to Lambda, on layers, click on create layer, layer name PyMySQL, load the zip file, PyMySQL layer. It is for Python, so choose Python, applicable for all the Pythons, and click on create. If you do not create this layer, then the Lambda will throw error. Since this library, it is external to the Python and we had installed manually in our PyCharm also. Now layer has been created. We'll go to the Lambda function and attach the layer. Click on layer, click on add layer, and on custom layer, choose PyMySQL version as 1. The layer also has been added. Now let us give all this constant value from the resources. For that, go to the configuration, and on environment variable, we can add environment variable here. First one is DynamoDB table name. So go to configuration, add environment variable. The name is DynamoDB table name, and the name of DynamoDB table is this one. Let me save it first and do for other environment variables. Next environment variable is SNS topic ARN. Go to configuration, edit, add SNS topic ARN, go to SNS, go to the topic that we had created earlier, and here is the ARN value of that SNS. So paste it here, save it. If you go to the code, then there is another constants with error bucket that is being fetched from environment variable. So let us create those environment variables. Configuration environment variable error bucket. Now let us give the name of error bucket S3. The name of error bucket is this one, and save. If you go to the code again, then there is another variable also. They are database user, database host, username, and database name. For that, let us go to RDS. Seems like our database is already created. Let me click on view connection detail. Our password is this one. So let me copy this password, and on configuration environment variable, add new variable, database password. Save it. Go to the function again. On transaction processor, let me copy this one so that there will not be any spelling mistakes or anything. Database password is this one. And again, add another environment variable with database user. The database user is admin. Database user is admin. Then again, there is another environment variable, database host, and name of that database host is this one, endpoint. Save. Let me go to the code and confirm the environment variable as that one, database host user password, and we also require database name. So let me copy this credential and create database first. Go to configuration. These are the details. So I have opened my SQL, which is the client for connecting to database. AWS. Yes. Now let me give all this value for connecting to database. Database host is this one. Database host is this one. Username is admin. Password is this one. Username is admin and password is this one. We have enabled public access, but it may not be enabled in security group. So we'll enable in security group if it is not accessible here. So for that, I'll click on database. On security group, inbound rule, inbound rule, all traffic has been enabled. But if you look at the source, then only specified source is allowed. So let me click on edit inbound rule and allow public access. For that, click on add rule. We require only access to port 3306. So click on MySQL and here from anywhere. Save rules. Now let me try to connect again. It is being connected successfully. Now let me create a new database here. Create database. Summarize. Save data. Database. Database. Summarize. Save data. Database has been created. Now you will use this database name in environment variable. Database name is this one and save it. Then there are some constants also. Go to constants, table name. So create table with that name. First of all, let me use that database and create table. Create table this one with columns as mentioned in the constants. Columns will be this one. Product name, it will be string. So varchar 255. Quantity, it will be integer value. So let me give as made amount, it can be in decimal. So let me give as double. Revenue, it can be in decimal. So let me give as double. File name, it will be alphanumeric. So let me give as varchar 55. Beside this, let me also add another value, inserted time, with value as date time and default value current time. And primary key will be file name. Default value now. Error on line number 4. This medium int should be at same place. The table has been created successfully. Now we will use this table to insert the data. Let me select the data first. There should not be any data since I have created just now. Select asterisk from table data. If you go to DynamoDB also, DynamoDB, then there should not be any data. Tables, there is one table. Explore table item, run, there are not any tables. So now let us test our architecture, but before doing that we require trigger to this Lambda. So click on add trigger. Trigger will be from S3. Our bucket name will be reprocess bucket. For all events, yes, add. So whenever we add file to this bucket, it will trigger this Lambda and other processing will be done. Now let us insert our sample file here. For that, let me go to my directory where I had stored my sample file. Desktop, this data, this project, no, test data. Yeah, there is sample file. We can see that there are two eggs, two apples in count, and there is three. So 3 plus 2 will be 5, total 5 apple, total sales of 100 rupees and total revenue of 10 rupees. And for apple, there will be 3 apples with total transaction sales will be 500 rupees and total revenue of 50 rupees. Let me upload this file. S3, reprocess packet. Yeah, reprocess packet, upload, add file, desktop, sample. I had stored in desktop, test data, second one. Let me upload. Let me go to the CloudWatch to view log if there is anything wrong. Log group, data summarize. There is one event. There is key error database host. Seems like we have misconfigured in the name. Environment variable. Yeah, it is data host here. So let me rename as database host. Save it. Let me refresh it again. Let me delete this file from here first and edit again. Let me add again. But before uploading, let us verify the workflow in case of error. We should get notification in client and the file should be in S3 bucket. We have got the notification error summarizing the file, and let me duplicate this. The file should be in S3 bucket error 1, not the reprocess button, error bucket. Yeah, file is there, and another is it should be also in the log of DynamoDB. Let me scan, and there is file with file name transaction CSV. Now let me upload the file, but before uploading there is primary key with file name, but there will be multiple records with same file name. So in such case I have to drop this primary key first. Table drop primary key. I should get error for that one also. because there were multiple primary keys. Let me head back and click on CloudWatch. Yeah, duplicate key because there were multiple records for the same file name. And if we go to here and scan, we get another file name. And if you go to here, then it is successfully summarized. We have to modify the code so that it will print the actual error. But for now, let me drop the code. Drop primary key. I have already dropped the primary key. Select data here first. No any data, and upload the data in reprocess bucket. This time it should be processed. Yeah, file is picked up. Let me resume. Yeah, getting file from the S3. Now the process seems to be completed. We can add extra print statement so that we can view our log workflow. Yes, the file is being successfully processed. There are 3 plus 2, 5 apples, 5 apples, 5 eggs, and of amount 100. 3 to 5 egg, 60, 40, 100, and revenue is 10 rupees. Revenue is 10 rupees. Insert time you can see here and validate here. File name is transaction. And for apple, there are 3 apple. 2 plus 1, 3 apple. 300 plus 200, 500 rupees. 500 rupees and revenue of rupees 50. Now let us try to create some error in the file and view the workflow again. Since there will be addition operation, let me name with some string value here so that it won't be able to add and it will throw error. And also let me rename the file. Rename from transaction to transaction 2. Now let me upload it. File is being picked. Resume. Yeah. Error summarizing the file. This time it cannot be converted into integer so that it cannot be added. We should get mail also. Yeah, we have get the mail also. Error processing this file transaction 2, not this one. I think this one. Yeah, error processing transaction 2, and please check the file in this error bucket. And error message is that value temp it cannot be converted into integer. So let me go to the this bucket to check error file, error bucket. Let me refresh it, and there is new transaction. Now let me try to upload a bulk file. Let me open it here. We can see that there are huge records around 2652. Let me go to the process bucket and upload this file. Sales test data. Upload. The file has been uploaded and picked also. Let us view on the log. Yeah, getting file. It has summarized. Now let us go to the database. We can see the file has been summarized. This sales test data contains revenue, amount, quantity, and all other things of different product item that were present in the file originally. There were 2028 scores, total amount of this much was sales, total revenue of this much was obtained, and so on. We should also get the success mail. Yeah, file summarized and session successful. Sale data is processed successfully. Summarized data is an RDS and log in DynamoDB. If you go to the DynamoDB also, then we should find the total record processed here 2652. 2652. So this was for it today, guys. If you like my video, give like button and subscribe to my channel so that you won't miss our future tutorials. Thank you.